The Paris Summit for a new global financial pact has started in Paris, France. World leaders are meeting to deliberate on the impact of the global crisis of the last 5 years that have plunged many of the developing countries into economic decline, alongside crippling debt and exacerbating energy and food insecurity. The summit's goal is to find ways to build a more inclusive and equitable financial system, one that enables climate transition and promotes biodiversity without jeopardizing development. Nigeria's President, Bolaji, is in attendance at the summit and says that Nigeria is ready to do business. Tinubu expressed Nigeria's readiness to welcome investors into the country when he received the president and chairman of the board of directors of African Export-Import Bank, Afreximbank, Professor Benedict Orama, and the president of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, Odile Renaud Basso, on the sidelines of the summit for new global financing. Also on the foreign scene, 5 people who were on board a missing Titan submersible are dead after what the U.S. Coast Guard says was a catastrophic implosion of the vessel. The sub went missing on Sunday during an undersea trip to view the wreck of the Titanic in the North Atlantic. That prompted an international search operation that produced remnants of the sub yesterday. Coast Guard officials have sent condolences to the families of the crew. Joining us now on the morning show to discuss both the Paris Summit and the International Search and Rescue Mission for the private Titan submersible is Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, Nigeria's former Minister of Foreign Affairs. Good morning, Prof, and thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning, Dr. Abati, and thanks for inviting me to your morning show. Good morning, Rufai, and good morning, Ayo.
Bless you, sir. Morning, sir.
Thank you for joining us, sir. Well, let's start with the front page story of this day, today, reporting President Tinubu's trip for the Paris Summit on new global financial pact. And at the forum, President Tinubu had told the persons he interacted with that the world can only ignore Nigeria at its own peril. He says ignoring Nigeria will be perilous to the universe. Do you agree?
Thank you very much for that question. I'm so conservative that I obey all instructions, but I'm going to cause trouble this morning on this show by starting by being an interloper, which is the question, which is what you would describe me before moving on to what you have asked me. And that is to say, I was a member of the Waste Commission, and that report is so comprehensive. I pray and hope that the morning show will actually call maybe 3 members of that commission to do an overview and oversight of the comprehensiveness of what we wrote. Nobody on your show has prescribed abolishing the Presidential Tribunal and going straight to the Supreme Court as part of shortening the process of the litigation. Nobody has addressed the issue. You see, everybody blames the chairman of INEC, forgetting that it's only one of the many members. Is not responsible for those members. Those members are appointed by the president, and they are political appointees. We made recommendation as to how you insulate the appointment of not just the chairman, but of all members from being loyalists of the government of the day. We made recommendation about the appointment and dismissal of Inspector General of Police and service chiefs, again to insulate them from showing electoral loyalties to the government of the day. So I've finished with my interloping. now to the question that you raised. There is no doubt that there is not a consensus in the world that the Bretton Woods institutions, that is the World Bank and the IMF, well, I won't say have outlived their usefulness, but that they not only do they need to be reformed, but they need to be restructured in order to reflect responses to the new issues facing the global south especially. There is no doubt that all the appointments made to the World Bank and the IMF, they reflect the old school. There is a need for a new school of thought. And to me, I find it rather interesting that France, to which has been conceded the position of president of the IMF, the Monetary Fund, only.
Okay, we'll try to re-establish connection with Professor Bolaji Akinyemi there. But the point he was making about the Waste Commission report, look, that issue keeps coming up.
Yeah. Yes.
And at this MBA Speedle conference, I recall that Dr. Olisa Agbakoba brought up the same issue and said there were specific recommendations, in that waste panel report that could help, deepen the integrity of the electoral process and also the, post-election, process, particularly in terms of disputes, and also in terms of the role of the Electoral Commission, which many commentators on the subject claim, is overburdened. So, I mean, it's a very important point that you raised there, very, very important. But you see, as it often happens, these reports are done, another government comes and the report is set aside.
And the pick and choose is actually the problem because, like you said, the Wade report has a lot, but subsequent government just decided to pick the one that suits them. Take, for instance, it was in the RIP report they first talked about use of NYSC core members, And also, the Waste report explicitly stated how even the INEC chairman should emerge.
Yeah.
How that process should be made very independent. But we never adopted that. It is always about the one that is convenient for us. I think the predominant problem is having a system where we can truly break this overemphasis on politics and demonetize politics. Because you see, most of the outcomes we see are made by politicians because they look at the long game. And they say, I go into politics and make a lot of money, so let me circumvent everything to favor me. Reports and the like and some other things like that. I think, okay, Doctor, over to you back.
Okay, looks like we have Professor Bolaji Akinyemi back with us on screen, Nigeria's former Minister of Foreign Affairs. Thank you, Prof, for staying with us. So if you may just continue with that, your comment on the Paris summit.
Okay. I was saying that I find it rather interesting that it is France to which the post of president of the IMF had been considered permanently that will now be sponsoring the moves for extra institutions to address, it's not just the needs of the global south, but to address the needs for the stability of the world financial system. I mean, this falls in line. If you input into it, the last conference of the French political, of the European political summit held sometimes last month, it fits into the pattern of Macron trying to position France as a critical voice for the restructuring of the world. It's a good move, and the issues that have been raised, how you will rescue global south from the consequences of COVID-19, the consequences of the Russian-Ukrainian war, which have very serious consequences for the economy of the global south, are very well, they are called for. and this is the right time for it. I'm glad at the presence of the Nigerian president. It's like saying to the world what Biden said when he became president: Nigeria is back. And the fact that there are so many of these important financial personalities, like the president of African Exim Bank, the president of the European Bank, and others on the sideline of the conference, coming to see and sound out, get the body language of President Tinubu, shows actually that they are interested. And I believe that he had a good package. He's told them about the economic positions and policies that he has put in place. And I was watching you earlier today, and I don't remember somebody who said he still needs to, no, it's Rufai who said he still needs to address the issue of stability of policies to make Nigeria investor-friendly, that those are still there. Too many tax laws that need to be streamlined. So I believe that it's a good outing for him. It's a good outing for Africa, because those who have spoken on behalf of Africa have all said the right things. This is a different outing than the idiocy of our outing in Ukraine and Russia, where we got the deserved insults by both countries over the self-appointed delegations. And I think this shows that when you are going to have an African delegation going to address a world problem, they should be chosen by the African Union and not by a president who is on an ego trip. Can you imagine Obasanjo leading a delegation as president of Nigeria and being interrupted by Putin, or being told by the special advisor to the president of Ukraine, go and mind your business, you know nothing about this? Obasanjo would have used both of them to wipe the floor. But here is Ramaphosa on an ego trip with hand-picked people who together don't even come close to the economic position of Nigeria, irrespective of our problems, claiming to represent Africa. And I don't think this was lost on the people that they went to. So I believe that not only for Nigeria, but for Africa, the Paris conference is a good outing for us.
Excellent. Professor Akinyemi, I'd like to take you to Canada, or perhaps what's happened with the Titan submersible vessel. It's taken the world by, the whole world, I would say, is interested in this particular story, which has turned tragic. In fact, it's been described as the submersible being having gone through a catastrophic implosion. Now, this has happened on international waters, and this is what I'd like to ask you, because there have been questions now raised around regulations of submersibles, regulations of deep sea explorations, and how different countries respond to this, or perhaps coming together when it's when it's on international waters to regulate this so that we don't have a reoccurrence of this. What's your take on this? How should the international world respond to this, and who will be leading on investigations to determine what could have been the cause of the implosion?
Thank you, Ayo. I'm emotionally upset about this tragedy. And if I'm not as fluent as I should be in response to your question, it's still because emotionally, I'm still trying to wrap my brain around that tragedy. Now, let me say this. It is part of human nature. It is part of who we are that we will go where there are challenges to us as a human race. We will go to the moon because it is there. We are going to go to Mars because it is there. We'll go to Venus because it is there. We will climb the Himalayas because it is there. And we will go to the depth of the sea to see the Titanic because it is there. This is part of who we are as human beings. So this will not be the last exploration. It will not be the last tragedy. It will not be the last accident. I mean, after all, rockets have exploded, carrying astronauts to their death. It didn't stop us. And therefore, I'm not going to join those who are critical of the exuberance of the adventurists, as they call them. I am critical of the issue that you raise, the non-regulation of this kind of adventures. All our adventures are non-regulated. Nobody is regulating how we go to the moon and what we do when we get there. Nobody is regulating how we go to Mars and what we do as we get there. There is a need. I was under United Nations cover for the world to meet and to decide on binding conventions for how we do things and what we do. You are not going to stop billionaires, trying to make profit out of sponsoring these trips. Musk has his own program for private people who will pay to go on his rocket. And some have even suggested that since I cause so much trouble, Nigeria should volunteer me to join those who are going to go. Thank God. I don't have the money to pay for my seat, so they're not going to get their wish. But these things will continue to happen. Do you know that there is, I think the ship is being built either in Japan or South Korea, an exact replica of the Titanic, bolt for bolt, knot for knot, and is going to set sail on the exact date that the old Titanic set sail from Southampton and follow the same route. And people have almost bought up half of the space on that ship. Now, I mean, if there's somebody out there who wants to sponsor me for that one, I will go on that ship. Not for the thrill of it, but as I said, it's because it is part of us as human beings to explore. I don't know how else I should say so. So my heart and my emotion goes out to the families. And I pray that, their souls will rest in peace. But this will continue to happen. This is not the last time. So you are right that there is a need for binding regulations, binding conventions under the United Nations. But you see, The problem is there is so much wealth, we don't even know how much, from the resources on the surface of the moon, Mars, from even the seabeds, and greed by this global north comes into it. They wouldn't want any regulations that will affect their ability to rake up these minerals, and rather than do it under the United Nations flag, they will want to do it under these artificial national flags that we have created out from no sense, but just circumstance and wars fought. That's what has led to the boundaries of almost all the countries in the world with their flags.
Okay.
But
Sir.
I'm deeply upset at the tragedy.
So let me slightly disagree with you, and I want to read you a speech. This address was made by President Kennedy at the Rice University, and it was a famous speech. He says, "We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve and organize and measure the best of our energy and skills. Because the challenge is one we are willing to accept and we are unwilling to postpone." I'd ask you this. If that trip had been successful, would you have said what you just said, sir?
Sorry, if what?
If that trip down 3,800 meters to the Titanic wreck had been successful, would you have said what you just said just now, sir?
Yes. Number one, I totally agree with President Kennedy. I think he was more eloquent the way he put it than I have been. It is in our nature to be adventurous, and we will always do that. You should see the expression on my face when they discovered the Titanic itself. But the point I was making in response to Ayo's question is that there is a need for regulation so that we don't have this cowboy attitude. Anybody can just knock together a few panels and then offer people to pay millions to go down and see the Titanic. Incidentally, I understand that by 2030, which is about 7 years from now, the Titanic ruins will have completely disappeared because it is being degraded by bacteria that eats iron. And I think that would be a shame. I know the United States has the capability to bring up that wreck, even though it is in two parts. They do have the capability, but it's been declared a human graveyard. And yet, to allow it to simply disappear, to me, will be removing one of those things that has animated the human soul. So I agree with President Kennedy, totally. And that's why I say we will always go there, because it is there, and not because, the human soul does not just want to sit down and do nothing. There are people who are willing to risk their lives and have risked their lives to discover the North Pole, to discover the South Pole, and if there is any other pole that all of a sudden they've discovered, you will find human beings, even billionaires who have money, who are prepared to risk everything to go there. So I disagree with President Kennedy. We will do it, not because it is easy, but because it is difficult. And success energizes that human personality.
Okay, Prof. Let me go back to this summit in Paris. Every time, African leaders are always very anxious to to go to this summit, whether it's Japan that summons them or it is any other country asking them to come. France is beginning to enjoy that attention now, summoning African leaders all the time. But there is this challenge about state sovereignty, which I tried to allude to earlier on when I was quoting what the UN Secretary General said. Okay, they talk about debt relief, talk about repayments being rescheduled and all of that. But we have seen in the example of Zambia, we have seen in the example of Djibouti and some other countries who just find themselves almost completely at the mercy, of this global north. What booby traps should our leaders watch out for?
In answering your question, let me start by thanking Arise News for the coverage you gave the Afri-Exim Bank 30th anniversary in Ghana. I make reference to this because the president of Ghana thanked that bank for rescuing Ghana from the impossible challenges that the World Bank was putting before Ghana to rescue it in terms of the financial difficulties it had. In fact, they were almost declaring Ghana bankrupt and ineligible for any debt relief or even any kind of funds from the World Bank. And the Afri-Exim Bank stepped in and made funds available that bailed out Ghana without forfeiting their own funds. And he publicly thanked the Professor O'Mara. He thanked him publicly for that. And that is the response to your question, that what Africa should be doing does not lie in going to make highfalutin speeches at those kind of conferences, but should concentrate on building up the capacity of their own continental institutions, financial institutions, whether it's the Afri-Exim Bank or the African Development Bank, so that those are the people, that those are the institutions they will turn to, institutions that understand the difficulties that have led us into some of those challenges that we face, instead of wasting resources and wasting time going to the international conferences at the drop of the pen. Can you imagine that after the insult heaped on us by Russia, they are planning the Russian-African Summit for the 3rd week of July? And I bet you probably 75%, if not more, of African leaders will turn up. I haven't been a head of state, but as foreign minister, I think I know a thing or two about protocol. I've never heard of one head of state interrupting the presentation of another head of state. And yet, Putin interrupted Ramaphosa when he was making his presentation. Unheard of. If I were Ramaphosa, I would have told Putin, excuse me, Mr. President, I haven't finished. You will wait until I have finished. And if that's going to be the end of the conference, then it will be the end of the conference and we will all walk out. But he just sat there along with the others. Now, that wouldn't happen if it is within the African context with African institutions. And what we should do is build up the financial capability of the African Exim Bank and the African Development Bank, build up their capability, because not all African countries have paid up their shares, so that in times of trouble, they could bail us out rather than looking forward to the international institutions that are long in resolutions but very short in actions, and actions that are not detrimental to our sovereignty and our national interests.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Professor Bolaji Akinyemi, Nigeria's former Minister of Foreign Affairs.